Three matte black SUVs cut through the evening fog and pulled to a halt, forming a wall of dark glass and steel directly in front of l'Oiseau Bleu. They didn't just park, they took possession of the curb. The engines idled, a low, predatory growl that made the wine glasses inside the restaurant hum. The door of the center vehicle clicked open. A man stepped out. Early 30s, sharp Asian features, wearing a tailored suit that caught the streetlights like armor. He adjusted his cufflinks with a slow, chilling precision. He didn't look at the valet. He didn't look at the gold leaf sign. Men like Shin Teo don't seek attention, they command it. Inside, at a window table, Sade Matthews sat in a silence that felt like a scream. She wasn't eating. Her anniversary dinner was a jagged mess on the white linen, dripping onto her soft cardigan and pooling on the floor. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bowed in a confusion so deep she looked broken. She had no more words for the woman standing over her. The restaurant's heavy glass door swung open. For a heartbeat, the city's roar rushed in, only to be cut short as the door clicked shut. Silence rippled through the dining room like a cold front. Every conversation died. Every fork was lowered. Lisa R. Long, the manager, looked up from the mess she had just made, her mouth already forming a sharp command to leave. But the words died in her throat. A cold shiver crawled down her spine. Because the man in the midnight suit wasn't looking at the menu. He wasn't looking at the decor. He was looking directly at her, and he knew exactly what she had done. If you've ever watched a bully pick on the wrong person and lived for the moment they got what they deserved, you need to hit that like button right now. Don't move a muscle, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because what this man is about to do to this restaurant, and the life-changing gift he has for the one waitress who stood up for his grandmother, is something you have to see to believe. Stay with me, because the ultra-elite are about to get a lesson in true power. The golden glow of l'Oiseau Bleu spilled out onto the sidewalk, looking like an invitation to a world Sade Matthews had only ever seen in magazines. She stood at the entrance for a moment, smoothing the front of her soft, peach-colored cardigan. It was her late husband's birthday, their first apart, and she had promised him they would celebrate it somewhere special, somewhere that felt like the life they had dreamed of during 40 years of hard work. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of grief and hope as she pushed open the heavy mahogany door. She wasn't looking for luxury for the sake of vanity, she just wanted 1 hour where the world felt kind, where the smell of lavender and roasted garlic could drown out the silence of her empty house. As she stepped onto the plush velvet carpet, the hushed clinking of silverware and the low hum of expensive conversation felt like a warm embrace. Sade clutched her worn leather purse, a small, hopeful smile playing on her lips. She approached the hostess stand where Lisa R. Long stood, draped in a sharp, dark blazer that seemed to repel light. Lisa was mid-laugh with a wealthy couple, but the moment her eyes landed on Sade, the warmth vanished from her face as if a shutter had been slammed shut. She didn't see the grandmother who had spent her life nursing the sick or the woman who had fostered dozens of children with nothing but a prayer and a pot of stew. She saw a stain. She saw short gray hair that hadn't been styled in a salon, a blouse that had been washed too many times, and a presence that didn't fit the ultra-elite aesthetic she guarded like a weapon. "Can I help you?" Lisa's voice was a jagged shard of ice. There was no greeting, no welcome. "Yes, dear," Sade replied softly, her voice carrying the gentle lilt of a woman who had never raised it in anger. "I'd like a table for one, please. Near the window, if it's not too much trouble. It's a very special day." Lisa didn't even look at the reservation tablet. Her eyes raked over Sade's cardigan with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. She made a calculation in less than a second, a calculation based on the lie that a person's worth is woven into the labels of their clothes. Behind her, Kalani Rhodes, a young waitress with a kind, observant face, paused with a tray of crystal flutes. She saw the way Sade's hopeful smile began to falter under Lisa's silent, judging stare. Kalani felt a knot of protective anger tighten in her chest, but before she could speak, Lisa leaned forward, her voice a poisonous whisper meant only for Sade. "We are fully committed for the evening," Lisa lied, her eyes flickering to the dozens of empty, candlelit tables behind her. "Perhaps there's a diner down the street more suited to your requirements." Sade flinched, her shoulders hunching just a fraction. The hope she had brought with her began to leak out of her heart, replaced by a familiar, crushing humiliation. She looked at the empty tables, then back at the woman who was treating her like an intruder in a house she had every right to enter. She stayed quiet, her fingers tightening on the strap of her purse, her dignity the only thing keeping her from turning and running back into the dark. Lisa R. Long did not just look at Sade Matthews, she dissected her. The manager's gaze moved with the clinical coldness of a merchant inspecting spoiled goods, starting at the soft, pilling wool of Sade's peach cardigan and ending at the sensible, scuffed leather of her orthopedic shoes. To Lisa, the restaurant was a sanctuary of high fashion and curated bloodlines, and every second this elderly woman stood in the foyer, she was polluting the atmosphere. Lisa's nostrils flared slightly, as if she could smell the scent of a modest life, of budget groceries and generic soap, clinging to Sade's clothes. In her mind, the calculation was already complete. This woman would order the cheapest appetizer, drink tap water, and linger for hours, ruining the aesthetic for the tech moguls and oil heirs who paid for the privilege of exclusivity. Sade felt the weight of that gaze. It was a feeling she had known in different forms for 70 years, the silent, heavy pressure of being told she was less than without a single word being spoken. She tried to maintain her posture, to remember the dignity her husband had always seen in her, but under Lisa's piercing stare, she felt her stature shrinking. She looked down at her cardigan, the one she had washed and ironed so carefully that morning, and suddenly it felt like a costume of poverty. The light in the foyer, once warm and inviting, now felt like a spotlight exposing every flaw, every year of struggle written in the lines of her face. Lisa leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a tone that was technically polite but vibrated with a jagged edge of cruelty. "I don't think you understand the nature of this establishment, ma'am. We have a dress code. We have a certain expectation of our guests. This isn't a charity hall or a soup kitchen. People come here to escape the ordinary." She let the word ordinary hang in the air between them, a heavy curtain meant to shut Sade out. Lisa's hand gestured vaguely toward the door, her fingers long and manicured, looking like the talons of a bird of prey. "There is a community center 3 blocks over that serves hot meals. Perhaps they can accommodate your budget." The humiliation was so sharp it felt physical, a dull ache blooming in Sade's chest. She looked at the empty tables once more, her eyes misty with a sudden, stinging heat. She wanted to tell Lisa that she had the money, that she had saved for months to sit in one of those chairs, but the words felt like ash in her mouth. How do you explain to someone who only values price tags that you are paying with your heart? Lisa's sneer deepened as she watched Sade's lip tremble, satisfied that she had finally broken the woman's resolve. She turned back to her reservation tablet, dismissing Sade as if she had already been erased from the room. She was so consumed by her own perceived power that she failed to notice Kalani Rhodes standing just a few feet away, her knuckles white as she gripped her serving tray, or the silent, dark shape of the SUV idling just outside the glass, where a pair of dark eyes were recording every second of this desecration. Kalani Rhodes felt the tray in her hands trembling, not from its weight, but from the lightning strike of fury coursing through her veins. She had worked at L'Oiseau Bleu for 2 years, and she had seen Lisa R. Long's mask of professionalism slip many times, but never with such naked, casual cruelty. As Kalani watched Sade Matthews' small, weathered hands clutch her purse until the knuckles turned a papery white, something snapped inside her. She saw in Sade the face of her own grandmother, the woman who had scrubbed floors so Kalani could wear a clean uniform, the woman whose dignity was never for sale. She could see the old woman's spirit retreating, her eyes clouding over with the devastating realization that she was being discarded like an eyesore. Kalani didn't pause to consider her mortgage or the fact that Lisa had fired people for far less than what she was about to do. She set her tray down on a nearby side table with a sharp, definitive click that drew several eyes from the nearby booths. With a purposeful stride, she stepped into the space between the predatory manager and the trembling guest. She didn't look at Lisa, she acted as if the manager had suddenly become invisible, a ghost of no consequence. Instead, Kalani reached out and gently placed her hand over Sade's shaking fingers. The touch was warm, solid, and filled with a silent promise. "Good evening, ma'am," Kalani said, her voice ringing out with a clarity that sliced through the hushed, elitist air of the room. "Welcome to Loiseau Bleu. We are so honored to have you with us tonight." Sade looked up, her breath catching in a small, hitching sob. The mist in her eyes cleared just enough to see the fierce kindness in Kalani's expression. Lisa's face, meanwhile, underwent a grotesque transformation, shifting from smug triumph to a purplish, strangled rage. "Kalani," Lisa hissed, her voice a low-octave warning. "What do you think you're doing?" "I told this woman we are." "You told her we were committed," Kalani interrupted, her eyes finally snapping to Lisa with a cold, unwavering fire. "But I just saw table 14 finish their coffee. And I know for a fact that the window booth is open." Without waiting for a response, Kalani turned back to Sade, her expression softening into a radiant, genuine smile. She reached out and took Sade's worn coat, draping it over her arm as if it were a royal robe. "My name is Kalani, and I will be taking care of you personally tonight. It's a special occasion, isn't it? I can see it in your eyes." Sade nodded slowly, a tiny spark of life returning to her face. "It's my husband's birthday," she whispered, her voice regaining a fraction of its strength. "Then we shall have the finest celebration," Kalani declared. She extended an arm, guiding Sade past the stunned manager. She didn't lead her to the back or to a hidden corner. She led her straight to the premier window booth, the one reserved for the city's elite, the one that looked out directly onto the street where the 3 black SUVs sat in a perfect, silent line. As Sade sat down on the plush velvet seat, Kalani tucked the linen napkin across the woman's lap with the grace of a courtier. She was going to give this woman a night to remember, even if it was the last thing she did in this building. She was unaware that outside, behind the tinted glass of the lead vehicle, Shinteo's grip on the door handle relaxed just a fraction as he watched the young waitress choose a soul over a paycheck. The atmosphere in the kitchen pass of Loiseau Bleu grew suffocating as Lisa Arlong watched from the shadows of the bar, her eyes narrowing into slits of venomous obsidian. Her pulse throbbed in her temples, a frantic, rhythmic beat of wounded pride. Every time she looked toward the window booth, she saw the stain, that old woman in the peach cardigan, sitting where she didn't belong, framed by the expensive glass like a masterpiece in the wrong museum. But what truly made Lisa's blood turn to acid was Kalani. The waitress was moving with a lightness and a dedicated grace that she usually reserved for the city's high rollers, and in her hands, she carried the restaurant's pride, the chef's signature wagyu, a dish that cost more than some people made in a week. Lisa watched as Kalani leaned down, her face glowing with genuine warmth, and placed the gold-rimmed plate in front of Sade Matthews. The aroma of truffles and seared herbs wafted through the air, but to Lisa, it smelled like insubordination. She saw Sade's eyes widen, her small hands coming up to her mouth in a gesture of pure, childlike wonder. The old woman looked happy. She looked seen. She looked like she belonged. And in Lisa's twisted world, that was a crime that demanded a public execution of dignity. Lisa felt the hierarchy of her kingdom crumbling. If a woman like Sade could be treated like royalty, then Lisa's own status meant nothing. She decided then that she wouldn't just fire Kalani, she would break the spirit of the woman who had dared to accept her kindness. Stepping out from behind the mahogany bar, Lisa's heels clicked against the floor with the predatory cadence of a firing squad. She didn't rush. She wanted the tension to build. She wanted the other diners, the real guests, to see what happened when the rules were ignored. As she approached the table, Kalani was just finishing the pour of a sparkling cider, treating it with the reverence of vintage champagne. Lisa didn't wait for a break in the conversation. She stepped into the light of the window booth, her shadow falling over Sade's plate like a shroud. "This has gone quite far enough," Lisa said, her voice a low, vibrating hum of suppressed rage. The smile vanished from Sade's face, replaced instantly by a look of panicked confusion. Kalani straightened her spine, her eyes meeting Lisa's with a fierce, protective glare, but Lisa didn't even acknowledge the waitress. Her focus was entirely on the grandmother who was just about to take her first bite of the birthday meal. Lisa looked at the wagyu, then at the cardigan, and let out a short, mocking laugh that felt like a slap. "We have a standard here, Kalani. A brand. And you've turned my dining room into a soup kitchen for the delusional. It's time to remind everyone exactly where they stand." She reached out, her fingers hovering near the edge of the gold-rimmed plate, her mind made up to make an example of the guest who had dared to hope for a special night. The silence that descended upon the dining room was not the peaceful quiet of an upscale evening, but a sudden, suffocating vacuum. Lisa R. Long did not hesitate, she did not allow a flicker of empathy to stall her hand. With a sharp, violent motion, she hooked her fingers beneath the rim of the gold-rimmed plate and yanked upward. Sade Matthews barely had time to gasp before the exquisite birthday meal, the result of months of careful saving and a waitress's brave kindness, was airborne for a fraction of a second. Then came the sound, a wet, heavy thud as the seared wagyu and rich reduction slammed onto the pristine white linen. The sauce splattered like an accusation, dark and oily, leaping from the table to the soft peach wool of Sade's cardigan. A large, jagged stain bloomed across her chest, the heat of the food seeping through the fabric to her skin, but the physical sting was nothing compared to the agony of the public shaming. Lisa didn't stop there. With the back of her hand, she swept the porcelain plate aside, sending it clattering across the table until it shattered against the floor. The sound of breaking china echoed like a gunshot in the vaulted room. Sade sat frozen, her fork still gripped in a trembling hand, hovering over a ghost of a meal. Her eyes, once bright with the memory of her husband, now darted frantically around the room, meeting the wide-eyed stares of the wealthy patrons at neighboring tables. Some looked away in embarrassment, others watched with a cold, detached curiosity. The confusion on Sade's face was the most heartbreaking thing Kalani had ever seen. The elderly woman looked down at her blouse, her breath coming in short, hitching hitches as she watched a drop of dark just roll down the pearl buttons of her blouse. It wasn't just food, it was her dignity, her husband's memory, and her right to exist in a beautiful space, all being trampled into the carpet. A single, heavy tear escaped her lash and fell into the mess on the table. Then another. Sade's shoulders, which Kalani had worked so hard to straighten, collapsed inward. She looked small, so impossibly small, under the harsh amber lights of the restaurant. Lisa stood over her, breathing hard, her face twisted into a mask of righteous elitism. She looked down at the sobbing woman not with regret, but with the satisfaction of a person who had successfully purged an infection. She didn't notice the way the air in the room had turned icy, or how the shadows from the black SUVs outside seemed to lengthen, creeping across the floor toward her heels. She only saw the ruin she had made, and for a moment, she felt like a queen. The silence in the restaurant was no longer empty, it was heavy, charged with the static of a brewing storm. Kalani stood frozen, her eyes darting from the shattered porcelain on the floor to the dark, ugly stain on Sade's chest. The air felt thick, like water filling a sinking ship. Before Kalani could even reach for a napkin to help the trembling woman, Lisa's voice cut through the air, sharp and final. "Get out." Lisa didn't look at Sade, her eyes were fixed on Kalani, burning with a frantic, desperate need to reassert control. "You're done, Kalani. Hand over your server key and get out of my restaurant. You want to play social worker? Do it on your own time. You're fired." Kalani didn't blink. She didn't argue. She slowly reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the silver key, and slammed it onto the table amidst the ruins of the Wagyu steak. The sound was a metallic exclamation point. With pleasure, Kalani whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. Because I'd rather starve than spend one more minute breathing the same air as a monster like you. But it was Sade who moved next, and her movement stilled the room. With a slow, agonizing grace, the elderly woman reached into her worn leather purse. She didn't pull out a wallet or a phone. Her fingers, still shaking, emerged holding a small, faded photograph. She didn't look at Lisa. She didn't look at the mocking crowd. She simply leaned forward and placed the photo face up on the center of the table, right in the middle of the spilled sauce and the broken china. It was a picture of a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed in a stark, sterile room. He was thin, with sharp features and a gaze that looked far too old for his face. On the back, visible through the thin paper, was a date and the name of a local foster home. Sade stood up then, her legs swaying but her back straighter than it had been all night. She didn't wipe the tears from her face, nor did she try to hide the stain on her cardigan. She looked at Lisa one last time, not with anger, but with a profound, soul-deep pity. He told me that in this world, people would try to make me feel small, Sade said, her voice barely a whisper yet carrying to the furthest corners of the room. I told him he was wrong. I told him that kindness was the only true currency. She turned toward the door, her hand finding Kalani's arm for support. It seems I was the one who was wrong. But don't worry, Lisa. He's coming to settle the bill. As the two women walked toward the exit, the restaurant remained in a deathly hush. Lisa looked down at the photo, her brow furrowing in confusion. She looked at the boy's eyes, eyes that felt strangely familiar, eyes that burned with a cold, latent power even through the faded ink. She didn't understand the calling card yet, but as the heavy glass doors swung open and the low, predatory hum of the idling SUVs outside surged into the room, a sudden, inexplicable terror began to take root in her heart. The heavy glass doors of Loiseau Bleu had barely clicked shut behind Sade and Kalani when the world outside seemed to shift its axis. The low, rhythmic thrum of the idling engine suddenly deepened, a mechanical growl that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the crystal chandeliers overhead. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the patrons watched as the 3 matte black SUVs moved in perfect unison, pivoting across the asphalt to block the entrance completely. They formed a wall of impenetrable steel, a barricade that signaled the end of the restaurant's normal operations. For a moment, the streetlights glinted off the tinted glass, and then, the passenger door of the center vehicle swung open with a heavy, pressurized hiss. The man who stepped out didn't run, he didn't even hurry. Shin Teo moved with the measured, lethal grace of a predator who knew the hunt was already over. He adjusted the lapels of his midnight blue suit, his movements fluid and precise, before looking up at the restaurant's sign with a gaze that seemed to freeze the very air. As he walked toward the entrance, the 2 men from the flanking SUVs fell in behind him, their faces masks of professional indifference. The diners inside sat paralyzed, forks halfway to their mouths, watching the silhouette of a man who radiated a terrifying, absolute calm, a silence so profound it was louder than a scream. When Shin pushed open the mahogany doors, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It wasn't just the influx of the cold night air, it was the arrival of an apex authority. He didn't look around the room for a hostess or wait to be acknowledged. His eyes swept the floor, finding the shards of broken porcelain, and then moved to the table where the mess of the ruined dinner lay like an open wound. Finally, his gaze settled on Lisa Arlong, who was standing by the bar, her face draining of all color until it matched the white linen she had just desecrated. Shin walked toward her, his handmade leather shoes echoing against the hardwood with a steady, haunting rhythm. He stopped exactly 3 feet from her, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes, the same eyes she had just seen in the faded foster home photograph. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The calm he projected was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on Lisa's chest, making it impossible for her to breathe. The man in the SUV had finally entered the light, and as he stood amidst the ruins of his grandmother's dignity, the air in Loiseau Bleu grew so thin that the elite crowd finally understood the true meaning of terror. Shin Tae-oh stood in the center of the dining room, a figure of absolute, frozen stillness. He did not look at the elite diners who were now shrinking into their velvet chairs, he looked only at Lisa, who was trembling so violently that the wine glass she held rattled against the mahogany bar. Shin reached out, his hand moving with agonizing slowness, and picked up the faded photograph Sade had left behind. He looked at the image of the hollow-cheeked boy in the foster home, the boy he used to be, and then he looked at the dark, greasy stain on the tablecloth where his grandmother's dignity had been discarded. "You see a woman in a cardigan and a quiet voice, and you think you see a victim," Shin said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that carried to every corner of the silent room. "You see someone who doesn't fit your brand, someone who isn't elite enough for your floors. But you are mistaken, Lisa. You didn't just throw a plate of food in the trash. You threw away the only reason this building is still standing." Lisa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Shin stepped closer, invading her personal space until the scent of his expensive cologne and the cold aura of the street seemed to swallow her whole. 10 years ago, this property was a pile of debt and broken dreams. It was an anonymous investment from a private trust that saved it, a trust built on the life savings of a woman who spent 40 years nursing the sick and fostering the forgotten. That woman was Sade Matthews. She didn't buy this place to make a profit. She bought it because she believed that everyone, no matter how humble, deserved a place to feel special. He gestured toward the ruin on the table, his eyes flashing with a sudden, lethal sharpness. "I am the administrator of that trust. I am the man who signs the lease you rely on. I am the boy in that photograph, and that woman is the mother who gave me a life when the world gave me nothing. Every brick in this wall, every light in this ceiling, and every cent in your paycheck belongs to the woman you just humiliated." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The wealthy patrons whispered in shock, and Lisa's knees finally buckled, her hand clutching the bar to keep from collapsing. She looked at the man she had feared and the photo of the boy she had ignored, finally realizing that the ordinary woman she had tried to erase was actually the sun around which her entire world orbited. Shin leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade against her throat. "You protected your brand by destroying my mother's heart. Now, I'm going to show you exactly what happens when an investment fails." The silence in Loiseau Bleu was no longer the silence of a funeral, it was the silence of a courtroom awaiting a final sentence. Shin Tae-oh didn't look at the crowd, his focus remained on the wreckage of the table. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a single, heavy fountain pen and a legal document that had been prepared the moment he saw the plate hit the table. He didn't raise his voice as he looked toward the kitchen door, where Kalani Rhodes stood, her coat already on, watching the scene with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Kalani," Shin said, his voice cutting through the stagnant air with an undeniable authority. "You were fired for choosing a soul over a paycheck. In this building, that is the only qualification that matters. As of this moment, the management contract for Loiseau Bleu has been terminated for cause. The new operating license is being issued to you. You are no longer a waitress, you are the owner. You will run this place with the grace you showed my mother, and you will never again have to ask permission to be kind." Kalani gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the room erupted in a chorus of stunned whispers. Lisa Arlong, meanwhile, looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her face was a mask of gray, twitching terror. "Mr. Shin, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "I have a career. I have a reputation." "You have a debt," Shin corrected her, his eyes turning to ice. "And today, you will pay it in the only currency you understand, humility." He gestured toward the floor, to the exact spot where the shattered porcelain and the greasy remains of the Wagyu steak lay scattered across the hardwood. "You were so concerned with the cleanliness of your brand. Now, you will clean it." Not with a mop, and not with a team. You will get on your knees, Lisa. You will scrub every inch of the mess you made until the wood beneath is as bare as the dignity you tried to steal. You will stay here until the last stain is gone, and only then are you permitted to walk out of those doors and never return. The elite patrons watched in a trance of poetic justice as the woman who had acted like a queen sank slowly to her knees. Her expensive blazer bunched at the shoulders, and her manicured hands trembled as she reached for a discarded cloth. The sound of her sobbing was the only noise in the room as she began to scrub the floor, her tears mixing with the dark sauce she had so arrogantly spilled. The heavy glass door swung open once more, and Sade Matthews stepped back inside. She had changed into a fresh, simple blouse, and though her eyes were still rimmed with red, her gait was steady. Shin's expression transformed instantly, the lethal predator vanished, replaced by a man who looked at his mother with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. He pulled out the chair for her, the same window booth that had been the site of her shame, and sat down across from her. Kalani, moving with a new, confident poise, brought out a fresh plate. It wasn't a standard menu item, it was a dish prepared with the quiet, soulful care that Sade deserved. As Sade picked up her fork, she looked at the man who had once been the hungry boy in the foster home photograph. She reached across the table and took his hand, her thumb stroking his knuckles just as she had 20 years ago. The black SUVs remained outside, a silent guard against the world, but inside the window of Loiseau Bleu, the light seemed to glow a little warmer. Sade finally took a bite of her dinner, her smile returning at last, because she was no longer eating alone. She was home. The story of Sade Matthews reminds us that true class isn't found in the fabric of a designer suit or the price of a vintage wine, it is found in the way we treat those who can do absolutely nothing for us. Lisa R. long believed that power was the ability to make others feel small, but she learned too late that real power is the strength to lift others up. When you look at a stranger in a faded coat or a simple cardigan, remember that you are looking at a lifetime of stories, sacrifices, and a heart that deserves respect. Sade didn't need a convoy of SUVs to be a queen, her royalty was in her kindness. What did this story teach you about the way we judge others? Have you ever witnessed a Sade being overlooked, or have you been a Kalani who stood up for what was right? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, I read every single one. If you believe that kindness should always have a seat at the table, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Your support helps us tell more stories that remind the world what truly matters. Stay kind, and I'll see you in the next one.